Moving on to Australia failing news. The OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of 38 member countries shaming each other into a better world. Australia is currently trailing behind other countries in terms of unemployment benefits, and without being too speculative, I would put a good portion of that onto the overtly spoken mantra, say it with me now, the best form of welfare is a job. I mean, you don't need to prop up welfare if you don't plan on putting anyone on it. Right? Seems reasonable. While the media keeps claiming that social security benefits are recently increased to keep up with the rising cost of living, they were also decreased from record highs to support people during the pandemic because, hey, guess what? They weren't enough for people to survive on. In a new report, the OECD said the benefit for a single person in the first month of unemployment is just 29% of the average wage. The OECD report said the income shock from falling into unemployment in Australia is much larger than in other countries, and minimum income supports remain well below the relative poverty line. One estimate suggests that 85% of recipients of unemployment benefits will be in poverty. So I guess you can't really call them benefits as such. The report pointed to government benefits being judged on the average wage instead of on the average cost of living, increasing the risk of Australians falling into poverty. Because while the cost of living continues to rise, wages have stayed lower than Sky News' opinions of Dan Andrews. The OECD said the Australian government should consider increasing unemployment support payments as well as moving to increase wages. And look, to their credit, they did consider it, but then they rejected it. The OECD suggested the government should index further increases to average wage growth. But honestly, I am sure that this will just end up with them impacting raising of the minimum wage further, because they will do what it takes to keep those welfare payments low. If you want to make sure that welfare recipients get paid, then I guess you've got to index it to parliamentary pay rises, because those things never get held back. They fly through every single time. The OECD said the government should increase spending on training programs for unemployed Australians, as well as ensuring private companies are doing what they can to keep their employees trained. Now, we are going to need some good training though, because acceptable training programs that will lead to long-term wealth for the poor include hiding your money in shell companies, exploiting your family for fun and profit, a Stuart Robert masterclass, the flexible ethics of taking bribes, and how to influence people and destroy the environment. Classes are selling out fast, so you better be getting quick. Another major pitfall of the report drew attention to was that Australia lacks rewards for long-term employment. It said that on average, training programs only supported Australians for up to 26 weeks of being employed, incentivising employers to get rid of people and hire newer, fancier employees and get those sweet hiring incentives. The report said initiatives that promote high-quality training programs will also benefit other vulnerable groups where low skills can be a barrier to finding a job, such as Indigenous Australians. Because if there's one thing that will bring equality, it is lifting up disenfranchised communities to the point where they can also manipulate systems and benefit from their misdeeds. We've got to get everybody there. The organisation said there is a big difference between how the young and the old are taxed, which has led to a large gap in wealth between generations, and that taxation should be aligned with different forms of savings. An idea so simple and genuinely effective, it'd never get passed in Australia. Sure, the Greens will campaign on it. They're never going to be in charge, so we don't have to think about it, I guess. I mean, we can't even manage to take control of the climate situation. Australia has been ranked last among developed nations on climate performance and pledges. I mean, it's not like We have a series of unprecedented natural disasters showing up at unnatural rates within one of our most populous states, or mass bleaching events, or News Corp turning to the path of climate change, which I actually believe was one of the signs of the apocalypse. Let's see. Yeah. Here it is. Here it's mass hysteria, cats and dogs living together, and News Corp supporting climate change. Yep, that's it. The federal government is currently debating net zero emissions policies, and we have had to bully our Prime Minister to actually show up to the Glasgow Climate Summit by scaring him with disappointment from the royal family.
There are some governments that seem reluctant to accept the urgency of this. I don't want to single out, I do want to single out some individual countries. Australia, for example, what would you say to a government like the government of Australia that seems reluctant to take on board the need to take really serious action on this issue?
No. I mean, you gently try to suggest there may be other ways of doing things. In my case, anyway. Otherwise, you lot accuse me of interfering and meddling, don't you?
Scott Morrison, the Australian PM, isn't even certain that he could make it to the meeting in Glasgow?
Is that what he says, is he?
He did say, yeah. He said he's spent enough time in quarantine. I mean, what would you say to world leaders about why they should come to Glasgow?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say all the time. And the point being that this is a last chance saloon.
A new report ranked Australia as the worst performing developed country when it comes to climate actions. We did it, guys. We did it. We're number one. Number one. Now, the ranking would not shift if the coalition agreed to a net zero emissions target by 2050, which they kind of have at this point. The Climate Council said that as it called on Australia to take on a sustainability strengthened 2030 target to Glasgow, which they basically have tiptoed around and said that they don't need to because they're going to hit their targets at a higher rate than what they've actually set, which is kind of shady anyway. And that's going to be a real problem when we find out things like 5 of the Nationals' 21 MPs and senators own shares in fossil fuel companies. Like, for example, Nationals Deputy Leader David Littleproud, who has the most resource-heavy share portfolio of anybody in the party. Let's have a look at it, shall we? So, it seems he's owning shares in BHP Mining Company, South 32, Blue Energy, Oil and Gas Exploration, and Atlas, an iron ore company run by Gina Reinhardt, whose Hancock Prospecting acquired it in 2018. He also has shares in Ausenco, an engineering company primarily servicing the resources industry. Weird. Littleproud's dependent children are also listed as having BHP and South 32 shares. Ooh. So really, he's just a good dad, providing a future fortune for his children to use to buy strong-armed guards to keep the plebs out of their shelter that they built in New Zealand, or as it will be known in the coming climate disaster, the last home. It's just wonderful to see someone being a good parent. Oh, and here's something interesting. He also voted some very specific and probably not at all related votes, like, for example, voting strongly for increasing state and territory environmental approval powers, which basically would weaken environmental laws more than they already are. He also strongly voted against government action on animal and plant extinctions. I guess there's no need to protect our unique flora and fauna, because protecting the things that have always lived in Australia is very un-Australian. He voted very strongly against community rights to say no to nuclear waste disposal sites, voted very strongly against increasing investment in renewable energy, very strongly against increasing transparency of a big business by making information public, and voted very strongly against protecting the Great Barrier Reef. Not to mention he voted very strongly against the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. Really starting to sense a theme here. Voted very strongly against treating government action on climate change as a matter of urgency. I mean, we got plenty of time. 2030 is like 9 years away. That sort of time is unimaginable in the scale of our lifetimes. I mean, these next ones aren't even environment related, but they were certainly interesting, and I think they help shape his character. In case you think that I'm like cherry picking data here, he voted very strongly against creating a federal anti-corruption commission. He voted very strongly against increasing penalties for breach of data. Ooh. This is related to for-profit companies that has been contracted by the government to store sensitive information or to provide services to citizens that fail to do so. So just a little piece of information for you there. He voted very strongly against stopping tax avoidance or aggressive tax minimalization. And this last one's a real doozy. He voted very strongly against treating the COVID vaccine rollout as a matter of urgency. David Littleproud. Littleproud we are, indeed. I mean, not much to say about that last one, except maybe, whoopsie. Probably should have considered that more of a thing. Let's see, who else have we got here? Regional Health Minister David Galefski, who was promoted to the front bench after Barnaby Joyce returned to the party leadership. Now, he has shares in BHP, South 32, and gold extractor Northern Star Resources. Funnily enough, so does his wife. His voting record is very much the same. Voted very strongly for unconventional gas mining, voted very strongly against government action on animal and plant extinctions, very strongly against a fast transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, strongly against a minerals resource rent tax, strongly against protecting the barrier reef, strongly against the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, strongly against treating government action on climate change as a matter of urgency. Whew, that was a mouthful. There's Senator Perrin Davey, shares in BHP, voted very strongly for Adani's proposed Carmichael coal mine in the Galilee Basin. Oh, weird. Voted very strongly for increasing state and territory environmental approval powers. Very strongly for unconventional gas mining. Very strongly for increasing investment in the coal industry. Very strongly for offshore oil mining. Strongly against a fast transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Very strongly against the carbon price. Voted very strongly against building community climate change resilience. Very strongly against government action on animal and plant extinctions. Then there's Senator Susan McDonald, who has shares in BHP. She voted very strongly for Adani's proposed Carmichael coal mine in the Galilee Basin. Very strongly for increasing state and territory environmental approval powers, which we discussed earlier. Very strongly for increasing investment in the coal industry. Very strongly for offshore oil mining. Very strongly against the carbon price. Very strongly against building community climate change resilience. Very strongly against ending illegal logging. Very strongly against government action on animal and plant extinctions. Voted very strongly against increasing investment in renewable energy. Very strongly against increasing marine conservation. Very strongly against increasing protection of Australia's fresh water, which seems like a weird one to vote against, but okay. Very strongly against protecting the Great Barrier Reef. Voted very strongly against protecting threatened forest and bushland habitats. And voted very strongly against stopping former ministers from taking lobbying positions within 5 years. Well, that seems very suspicious. Voted very strongly against the Paris Climate Agreement. very strongly against treating government action on climate change as a matter of urgency. Starting to notice some patterns here. And this is Ken Dowd, who is retiring as the member of Flint in central Queensland, but he has shares in Giant Woodside Petroleum. Now, O'Dowd has interest in BHP, Rio Tinto, and Caltex, and voted very strongly against the carbon price. Voted very strongly against a fast transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Voted very strongly against a minerals resource rent tax. Voted very strongly against carbon farming. Very strongly against ending illegal logging. Voted very strongly against government action on animal and plant extinctions. Voted very strongly against increasing investment in renewable energy. Voted very strongly against increasing marine conservation. Very strongly against increasing protection of Australia's fresh water. Again, why are we not protecting our fresh water? Voted very strongly against letting environmental groups challenge the legality of certain government decisions. Voted very strongly against protecting the Great Barrier Reef. But hey, of these, using the Nationals as your scapegoat nonsense, it's a bit much, guys. After all, the Nationals have given their in-principle support to back a target of net zero by 2050. Yeah, sure, in principle. I mean, I'm all for the idea of it. Barnaby Joyce said most concerns had been allayed when the majority of members and senators were now on board with the plan, saying, "We're in support of a progress going forward that would go towards a 2050 emissions target." Oh, you're in support of a process. A process, you say. I mean, I'm also in support of a process. When I'm asked to take out the trash, I have a 4-hour party meeting with the MAP party, and I come out saying that it wasn't enough time to make a decision and if I should take out the trash, and then I have to have a second meeting after which I come to the decision that I should commit to the idea of a process of looking towards taking out the trash by 2050. Everybody is happy, including the trash. Nobody ever considers the feelings of the trash. Maybe it doesn't want to be taken out. So what has driven this groundbreaking agreeing to the looking at the idea of maybe committing to saving the land that farmers farm on? What could it possibly have been? The Nationals won an extra cabinet position as they signed onto the net zero deal. Interesting, very, very interesting. Well, here's a man who's willing to acknowledge that an adult conversation about nuclear needs to be had. That technology has changed.
Keith Pitt has been pushing in federal parliament for what he calls an adult conversation about nuclear power.
Well, that was a bit of a curveball, and I'm not sure that heading into a desperate battle for votes in an election next year that you should be stoking the nuclear fire, my friend. People still remember Chernobyl, the HBO show. I mean, not the actual disaster. It's been a while since that happened. But the show was really good, right? I really loved how it was sure to highlight how the pride and arrogance of government officials in the face of experts and blatant evidence that a disaster of earth-damaging proportions was getting out of control, and to save the people who'd be most impacted by it, you know, the ones that were far, far away, they needed to show supplication and inform the public of the truth and take action. But I guess there's no reason to worry about comparisons, as you've so rightly pointed out, the technology has changed.
Forward. Technology has moved. It's like trying to compare the old FJ Holden with what's happening now with a Tesla, for example. Things have really moved on.
Though, I'm not sure old Keith should be using Tesla as his comparison, as he has trouble understanding electricity.
The Minister for Resources.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Member for their question and say to the Honourable Member, find me a solar panel that works in the dark. I mean, this is just a statement of fact, Mr Speaker. It absolutely is.
So you have fallen so low that Anthony Albanese is actually able to roast you in Parliament. Good work, Keith. Doing a great job there.
Last week, the Minister told Question Time, quote, find me a solar panel that works in the dark. Is the Minister aware that batteries can store renewable energy? And does the Minister get a shock when he turns on the tap and water comes out even though it's not raining outside?
But maybe the biggest problem is the plan Morrison and friends are bringing to the table. Tell us, won't you, Angus Taylor?
Our plan is to get to net zero by 2050 through technology, not taxes.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't realise it was all about technology, not taxes. Well, let's hear all about the wonderful new technology that is going to help us bring down our very high coal emissions rates. I mean, look at this chart. We're even higher than the US. I mean, we're just above, but we are higher than the US. And they're sending billionaires to space like the planet is dying from some sort of predictable environmental catastrophe. No reason to worry about that. And the Morrison government has, to put it lightly, had a real middle child dragging their feet to do a chore energy on renewables. Let's have a look at Morrison here. We got a clip?
It's the Prime Minister's own words that said that the biggest battery in Australia, in South Australia, to store energy, renewable energy, was as useful as the big prawn and the big banana.
By all means, have the world's biggest battery, have the world's biggest banana, have the world's biggest prawn.
It's the Prime Minister who said that new technology in the form of electric vehicles would end the weekend. This is a Prime Minister who has disparaged action.
I mean, 50% renewable energy target is nuts.
He's become a caricature of himself, having spent years ridiculing action on climate change. I mean, it's bizarre, Kieran.
50% renewable energy target is nuts.
And the truth is that this is a government that are running out of time.
I mean, if Albo keeps this up, I'll be out of a job. There's only room for one of us making mediocre jokes about Oz politics, and I guess I'll have to take my turn as PM, fail at it, and get a golden retirement. I mean, whatever it takes to stop Dutton from getting in. Though it is incredible the short-sightedness of the lack of transition and development of some of the investment or funding towards the CSIRO. I don't know if they are aware of this, but we live in a desert. Sure, we're getting wild rainstorms now, but once the tornadoes have taken our water somewhere over the rainbow to Oz, we'll be left with only the desert that we deserve. Look at this. It says this statement here. You can't grow food without water. The World Meteorological Organization recently warned of a looming global water crisis. In Australia, the CSIRO says average annual Murray-Darling inflows have almost halved since 2020. And according to an Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences report in July, the average Australian farm is losing $30,000 a year because of climate change, mostly because there is less water. That quote was from an article in The Australian. Again, look at what can be achieved when the journalists are allowed to journal. Lists proper quotes with facts backing them up. Granted, the power and influence of the Murdoch papers will mean that the coalition is somehow still in government in 2050, delivering their new net zero plan. Do we have a clip?
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence.